play mid 2019. So a little bit of background for just to give you kind of a picture on why Blue UAS is what it is and what the green list is and why that exists. So the Blue UAS program started, it was a defensive innovation unit that basically their main goal was to get COTS, so commercial off-the-shelf drones, into the DoD space. So, you know, is it cybersecurity check, making sure there was no Chinese components, so NDA compliant, and then to make sure that their supply chain and their manufacturing would be able to support, you know, DoD requests and DoD, you know, purchases, procurements. So that was their main objective. There was the first tranche that went through the program, and it was tied to the short range reconnaissance program for the Army. So that's why the first 5 drones that came through that were Blue approved were basically spec'd the same way. So there are 5 quadcopters, you know, Parrot, Skydio, Teal, Vantage Robotics, and Altavian, which is no longer. But those were the first, you know, the first systems that were Blue approved. That the DoD had signed off on. So the one thing that the Blue US also does as well is also the Pentagon or a DoD entity or agency, not entity, unit has to basically give that drone authority to operate. So that was the program. So DIU never wanted to be the gatekeepers in this space. They never wanted to be the end all be all of what is Blue approved and what's not, and what, you know, the DoD can and cannot buy. So with that being said, the green list basically started. So AUVSI manages that list, and they basically go through all the same process that you would through the Blue program. So cybersecurity, you know, your supply chain manufacturing, and it gets you all the way up to the point of not, but the only thing you don't have is an authority to operate within the DoD space. That requires a sponsorship through, you know, through the DoD. So a green UAS list is, as long as you're not operating within the DoD realm, it will basically is the same as a Blue UAS system. So it's just something to keep in mind. And I don't know, this is a fairly new program. I think there's 7 or 8 companies that are going through it right now. I know it is a pretty tedious process. Those manufacturers actually pay to go through this process. And, you know, once we kind of figure out what that looks like and what the first round looks like, we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be some growing pains initially, but this should open up a lot more options within the space to provide, you know, different drone platforms. And the other thing is GSA only offers Blue Blue drones that can be procured through GSA. So Matt's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think when people talk to Jeb and they get really excited about a drone, and then they move over to the boring lawyers and say, well, how do I actually make that happen? One of the first misconceptions, and I like that Jeb used the word purchase through GSA, because people will come to me and they'll say, well, I heard GSA, you know, will only buy this type of drone. If we're going through what GSA's policy on drones is, it's actually very simple. They don't buy them, ever. They don't buy any kind of drones. They don't buy any helicopter. I shouldn't say ever. You can't ever say never. There's like one tiny little exception that we're going to ignore today. But for the most part, GSA will not buy a drone. Now they'll help your agency procure it if it's on the Blue list or turning into the green list. So that they'll help with that. But whenever people ask me, well, GSA said they won't do this, yeah, they won't buy it for themselves, but they will help you procure them. The one thing that GSA will do, and I think is worth sort of looking at the GSA acquisition manual, is they move towards services a lot. They are very permissible in using drones as a service. I think it's a good bellwether, because that's what we're going to see more and more in federal agencies, is very restrictive practices on purchasing a drone and being much more permissible in procuring services. We're kind of at a tipping point right now, because I think this is maybe where I would read the regulations and say it looks much easier to procure services, and Jeb would read the marketplace and say it's very difficult to get services. But that's the market shift that we're seeing now, and what we're, I guess, here to talk about today. So again, GSA will allow services for a blue list drone, FAA regulated pilot, not for the exclusive use of the federal government. That's one of the places that can get a little tricky is if you're sharing someone's drone, you can get those services, but it's much more difficult to contract for. This is our drone that 40 hours a week is going to be on call for us. But Jeb's going to talk a little bit about who is operating in that service space and what options might be out there.
Yeah, so specifically in the small quadcopter space that we do the majority of our business in, I think the drone as a service is probably a great business model case, right? Because what do drones do? What do pilots do with drones? They crash them, they fall out of the sky, it happens. It's just the nature of a drone, right? So having to be able to say I have a fleet and I know that, if one of my drone pilots crashes a drone or one of my drones fails in the field or, whatever, it just gets beat up by doing day-to-day activities, day-to-day operations that, I know that I'm gonna get another, system to replace that, so I don't have to go out and procure. The challenge with that is, right now, obviously supply chain, but as well as cost. As you well or may not know, blue drones are much more expensive, and I'll get into that a little bit more on the next slide. But the challenge with having some sort of that type of program is the cost effectiveness of it right now. I think in theory it sounds great, and it's probably what most organizations want. I kind of look at it as and Matt can attest to this, is like the Navy buys, they don't buy laptops, they lease laptops, right? Because you replace a laptop every year and a half. I mean, drones are kind of the same way. The capabilities are gonna get better. Software needs to be updated. They do get beat up because they're in the field. So is that viable? I don't know, but I think it is something that the user and the customers that we deal with is definitely something that they would be interested in. But as the drones change in the marketplace, we're also seeing more changes to the state regulations.
Yeah, and this is an interesting trend right now. So we have 4 states right now that have blacklisted DJI drones. And you look at that, there's some reasons to do that. One is that same cybersecurity risk could be there for a state government. 2 is interoperability, right? So if you have working with federal agencies, or if you're hiring veterans, right, they're coming out of what is typically a Parrot or a Skydio system, and if you're trying to give them a DJI drone, there is a learning curve there, so you eliminate some of that. You support U.S. Industry, as we said, but there's a lot of reasons not to do that as well. DJI still controls about 70% of the marketplace, and they, quite frankly, for the dollars, still make the best drone. And that's the tension that we see right now at the state and local level. Is you do have a political or other security interest in restricting these drones, but when you get down to hey, I have a grant from DHS and I want to buy drones and I need to get the most for my money, it makes the most sense to go with DJI. So we're seeing that, again, that shift is happening, but I think there's still a little bit of a curve for some of our American or other blue list drones to catch up to DJI. State and local law, we're seeing, and again, I find it very interesting. For example, you look at privacy law, you have a lot of states that are maybe going in the same direction, but at different speeds and taking different paths to get there. But in general, we're moving towards protecting consumers through privacy law. You're seeing the same trends. It's not the case with drones. You're seeing some states and local governments really restrict the government's use of it, really restrict the data that's collected with drones, and scaling that back. And you're seeing other state and local governments go in the complete other direction, where they're empowering and they're allowing and they're explicitly providing statutory authorization for police departments to use drones as first responders, to use facial recognition software, and kind of clear up some of those inconsistencies or new areas of law in favor of law enforcement. And again, that becomes tricky looking ahead, because that's probably the biggest question that we get when we have a customer. They've usually gotten a grant or want to work with an agency, and they say, okay, we want to buy this drone. you know, are you sure that in 3 years I'll still be able to fly it, or is it going to be restricted? And we don't know. Or are you sure that in 3 years we'll still be able to collect this information, or we'll be able to use it as a first responder? And because of the legal and political landscape, we don't know. I think a great analogy is you look at license plate readers, right? Where if you ask the lawyers, like, hey, can you read a license plate on the street? The answer is sure. You know, can you drive by and read one with a scanner and run through the database? Sure. But when you start to get to a level where you say, okay, every night we're going to read every license plate in Chicago, we're going to record where we read it, we're going to record whose car it went to, and we're going to maintain that in a searchable database for an extended period of time, then the public comes out and you know, you have protests and you have to scale that back. So I think, again, we're at a similar place in our journey with drones where the one-off is very exciting. People want to see that. They don't get as nervous about maybe a drone first responder, but now if you tell them, you know, hey, Chicago PD is going to have a fleet of drones, and they're going to be patrolling, and they're going to be recording, and they're going to be storing data, you start to get a lot more pushback. So I think we're going to see that landscape change as well, and I think it's a difficult thing for